The night was thick with a humid heat that clung to my skin like a second layer. I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. The ice cubes clinking softly as I swirled the amber liquid. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner struggling against the oppressive warmth. My wife, Lily, had retreated to our bedroom hours ago, claiming a headache. My daughter, Emma, was out with friends, as usual. And my mother, Evelyn, was in her room, the door firmly shut. I took a long sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. Something felt off tonight. It wasn't just the heat or the silence. There was a tension in the air, a weight that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind the closed doors of this house. Something I wasn't supposed to know about. I stood up, the glass still in hand, and wandered toward the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. I paused outside Evelyn's door, my hand hovering over the knob. There was a faint murmur of voices inside, too low for me to make out the words. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed my ear against the wood. At first, I couldn't hear much, just the occasional whisper, the rustle of fabric. But then, a moan. Soft, but unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. What the hell was going on in there? I turned the knob slowly, careful not to make a sound, and pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Evelyn was on the bed, her back arched, her hands tangled in Lily's hair. My wife was kneeling between her legs, her mouth working in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The room was filled with the sound of their heavy breathing, the wet, rhythmic sounds of their bodies moving together. I stumbled back, the glass slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. The noise startled them, and they both turned to look at me, their eyes wide with shock. "Peter," Lily gasped, scrambling to cover herself. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. My wife and my mother, together, like that. "Get out," Evelyn said, her voice cold and commanding. "This doesn't concern you." I backed out of the room, my legs shaking, and stumbled down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached the kitchen, where I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a chaotic mess. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? Or had they been doing this behind my back for years? And what about Emma? Did she know? Was she involved in some way? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. I poured myself another glass of whiskey, my hands trembling so badly that I spilled half of it on the counter. I downed the rest in one gulp, the burn doing little to calm my nerves. I needed answers. I needed to confront Lily, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't bring myself to go back to our bedroom. Not yet. Not after what I had just seen. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I needed to get out of this house, to clear my head. But as I stepped outside, I realized I had nowhere to go. The streets were empty, the night air heavy with the scent of rain. I got into my car and drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring as I sped past. My mind was still reeling. The image of Lily and Evelyn burned into my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to fall apart, that everything I thought I knew was a lie. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, a seedy place where no one would recognize me. I ordered another whiskey and sat in a corner booth, staring at the glass as if it held the answers to all my questions. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gave me a sympathetic look. "Rough night?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She slid another glass across the counter. "On the house." I thanked her with a nod and took a sip, the alcohol doing little to dull the ache in my chest. I didn't know how long I sat there, drowning my sorrows in whiskey, but eventually, the bar started to empty out. The bartender wiped down the counter and gave me a pointed look. "We're closing soon." I nodded and stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I paid my tab and stumbled out into the night, the cool air doing little to clear my head. I drove back home, my thoughts still a chaotic mess. The house was dark when I arrived, the silence almost oppressive. I crept inside, careful not to make any noise, and headed for the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, my head spinning. I didn't know what to do, how to process what I had seen. All I knew was that my life would never be the same again. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I heard a soft creak from the hallway. I turned my head just in time to see Emma standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Dad," she whispered, "are you okay?" I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just go back to bed." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and disappeared down the hallway. I closed my eyes, the weight of the night pressing down on me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, the remnants of last night's whiskey still lingering in my system. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt like a cruel joke. A reminder that life went on even when your world was falling apart. I sat up slowly, my body heavy with exhaustion, and rubbed my face with both hands. The house was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't know if Lily or Evelyn were still home, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I forced myself to get up and shuffled into the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tiled floor. The coffee machine was already on, the rich aroma filling the room. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, sipping it slowly, hoping it would clear the fog in my mind. "Morning," a voice said behind me, making me jump. I turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern, her eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have. "Morning," I replied, my voice hoarse. She walked over to the coffee machine and poured herself a cup, her movements slow and deliberate. "You okay, Dad? You look rough." I forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well. Don't worry about it." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Emma was too perceptive for her own good, always picking up on things she shouldn't. "Where's Mom?" she asked, her tone casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. "I don't know," I admitted. "Probably upstairs." Emma took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. "You two had a fight or something?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Just adult stuff." She rolled her eyes, a hint of her usual rebelliousness creeping back in. "Right. Because that's not vague at all." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Look, Emma. I'm not in the mood for this, okay? Just let it go." She studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. But if you need to talk, I'm here." I nodded, grateful for her understanding, even if it was laced with sarcasm. "Thanks." Emma finished her coffee and set the mug in the sink. "I'm heading out. See you later." "Be safe," I called after her, but she was already out the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway, before turning back to my coffee. The house felt even quieter now, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. I needed to talk to Lily, to confront her about what I had seen. I took a deep breath and headed upstairs, my heart pounding with each step. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, my stomach twisting in knots. Lily was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Peter," she whispered, her voice trembling. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms over my chest. "We need to talk." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I know." I took a step closer, my jaw clenched. "What the hell was that, Lily? What were you doing with my mother?" She flinched at my tone, her hands trembling in her lap. It's not what you think." "Really?" I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface, because it looked pretty damn clear to me. Lily looked down, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry, Peter. I never wanted you to find out like this." "Find out what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What are you not telling me?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. "Evelyn, she's not your mother." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process her words. "What are you talking about?" Lily stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. "She's your biological mother, Peter. Your real mother." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "What? That's impossible. My mother died when I was a baby. Evelyn's my stepmother." Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That's what she wanted you to believe. She had an affair with your father, and when your mother found out, she couldn't handle it. She left, and Evelyn stepped in to raise you." I stumbled back, my legs giving out as I sank onto the bed. No, that's not true. It is, Lily said softly, sitting down beside me. I didn't know until recently. Evelyn told me everything. I shook my head, my mind reeling. Why? Why would she do that? Why would you keep this from me? Lily reached for my hand. But I pulled away. I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, Peter. Scared of losing you. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to make sense of it all. So what? You and her? You're together now? Is that it? Lily looked down, her cheeks flushing with shame. It's complicated. We have a history, Peter. One that goes back further than you know. I stopped pacing, my heart pounding in my chest. How far back? She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Before you and I met. We were involved. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You're kidding me. Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Peter. I never meant to hurt you. I turned away, unable to look at her. Get out. Peter, please. Get out. I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. She stood up, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked to the door. She paused for a moment, her hand on the knob, before turning back to me. I love you, Peter. I always have. I didn't respond. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She opened the door and left. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway. I collapsed onto the bed, my head spinning. My whole life was a lie, and I didn't know how to process it. Evelyn wasn't my stepmother. She was my mother. And Lily. Lily had been with her before we even met. The thought made my stomach churn, and I buried my face in my hands, trying to block it all out. But the images kept coming. Unbidden, Lily and Evelyn together, their bodies entwined, their moans filling the air. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of it all pulling me under. I didn't know how to move forward, how to face the people I thought I knew. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again. The days blurred together after that. I moved through them like a ghost, barely present in my own life. Lily and I barely spoke, our interactions reduced to terse exchanges about household chores or Emma's schedule. Evelyn, on the other hand, seemed to be everywhere, her presence a constant reminder of the lies that had shaped my life. I avoided her as much as I could, but it was impossible to escape her completely. She was always there, hovering in the background, her eyes watching me with a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. Emma, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the tension in the house. She was too wrapped up in her own world, her rebellious streak growing stronger with each passing day. She came home late at night, her clothes disheveled, her eyes glazed over with the effects of whatever she'd been doing. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I didn't have the energy. One evening, I found myself alone in the house. Lily had taken Emma out for dinner, and Evelyn had gone to visit a friend. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't stand it. I grabbed my car keys and headed out. Not sure where I was going, but knowing I needed to get away. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, a dingy little place where the lights were dim and the drinks were strong. I ordered a whiskey and took a seat at the bar, my eyes scanning the room without really seeing anything. Rough night? A voice asked beside me. I turned to see a woman sitting a few stools down, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She had a glass of red wine in her hand, her lips curved into a faint smile. You could say that, I replied, taking a sip of my drink. She slid onto the stool next to me, her perfume a heady mix of jasmine and something else I couldn't place. I'm Claire. Peter, I said, shaking her outstretched hand. So, Peter, she said, leaning in closer. What brings you to a place like this on a Wednesday night? I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Just needed to clear my head. She nodded, her eyes sympathetic. I get that. Sometimes life gets complicated. You have no idea, I muttered, downing the rest of my whiskey. Claire flagged down the bartender and ordered another round for both of us. Well, whatever it is, I'm here to listen. Sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger. I studied her for a moment, her kind eyes and warm smile making me feel more at ease than I had in weeks. Thanks. I appreciate it. We talked for hours, the alcohol loosening my tongue as I poured out my heart to her. I told her about Lily, about Evelyn, about the lies and the secrets that had torn my life apart. Claire listened without judgment, her hand occasionally brushing against mine in a gesture of comfort. By the time we left the bar, the world was spinning, and I wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or the weight of everything I'd been carrying. Claire offered to drive me home, and I didn't protest. We pulled up to my house, the lights inside dark and the driveway empty. Claire turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "You sure you're going to be okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Yeah, thanks for everything." She leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a soft, tentative kiss. "Take care of yourself, Peter." I watched her drive away, the taste of her lips still lingering on mine. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the numbness that had taken over my life. I stumbled into the house, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I made my way to the living room and collapsed onto the couch, my head spinning. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I shrugged, not bothering to sit up. Out. Out where? Does it matter?" I shot back, my anger bubbling to the surface. Lily took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "It does when you come home smelling like whiskey and perfume." I sat up, my jaw clenched. "What do you care, Lily? You've been keeping secrets from me for years. Don't act like you're suddenly concerned about my well-being." She flinched, her hands trembling at her sides. "I'm still your wife, Peter. I still care about you." "Do you?" I asked, my voice cold, because it sure as hell doesn't feel like it. Lily looked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm sorry, Peter. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix things." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice breaking. "You've destroyed everything." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Peter, don't shut me out." I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I can't do this right now, Lily. I can't." I walked past her, my head spinning as I made my way upstairs. I collapsed onto the bed, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know how to fix this, how to move forward. All I knew was that my life was falling apart, and I was powerless to stop it. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in my mind. I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache and a sense of dread that settled deep in my chest. The events of the previous night were a blur, but the guilt and confusion lingered, sharp and unrelenting. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the energy to face another day. Lily was already gone when I finally dragged myself downstairs. The house felt empty, the silence almost oppressive. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about Claire, about the way she'd listened to me, the way she'd kissed me. It had felt good. For a moment, to feel wanted, to feel like someone cared. But now, in the cold light of day, it felt like just another mistake, another layer of complication in an already tangled mess. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Emma walking in, her hair a mess and her clothes wrinkled. She looked like she'd been out all night, and the sight made my stomach twist. "Morning," she muttered, avoiding my eyes as she headed for the coffee machine. "Emma," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Where were you last night?" She shrugged, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Out with friends." "Out with friends," I repeated, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been about you? You can't just disappear like that, Emma. It's not safe." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Oh, so now you care? Where were you when I needed you, Dad? You've been so wrapped up in your own drama that you haven't even noticed what's going on with me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. I'd been so consumed by my own problems that I'd neglected my daughter, and the realization filled me with shame. "Emma, I'm sorry," I said, my voice softening. "You're right. I haven't been there for you, and that's on me. But I'm here now, and I want to help. Whatever's going on, you can talk to me." She stared at me for a moment, her anger giving way to something else, something that looked a lot like pain. "It's too late for that, Dad." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what to do. I knew I needed to talk to Lily to try and salvage whatever was left of our marriage. But every time I thought about it, the image of her with Evelyn flashed in my mind, and the anger and betrayal came rushing back. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. When I got back, Lily was home. She was sitting in the living room, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Peter," she said softly when I walked in, "we need to talk." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, we do." I sat down across from her, the tension between us palpable. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything. For keeping secrets, for hurting you. I never wanted any of this to happen." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Why, Lily? Why did you lie to me? Why did you keep something so important from me?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of what you'd think of me. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd never forgive me." "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Now I'm even more scared. I don't want to lose you, Peter. I love you." I felt a lump form in my throat, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "I don't know if I can do this, Lily. I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I understand. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am." We sat in silence for a while, the air heavy with unspoken words. "What about Evelyn?" I asked finally, my voice hard. "What's her role in all of this?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting away. She's been a part of my life for a long time. Longer than you know. But it's not what you think. It's complicated. Complicated, I repeated, my anger flaring. "That seems to be the theme of my life lately." She flinched, her hands trembling. "I know I've hurt you, Peter, and I know I can't undo the damage I've done. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. "I don't know if that's possible, Lily." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, but I'm not giving up on us, Peter. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I didn't respond, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could fix this. But the wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fresh. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I need time to figure out what I want." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Take all the time you need, Peter. I'll be here when you're ready." I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I'm going for a drive. I need to clear my head." She didn't try to stop me, just watched as I walked out the door, her eyes filled with sorrow. I drove aimlessly, the road stretching out before me like a metaphor for my life. Endless, uncertain, and full of twists and turns. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was looking for. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things were. As the sun began to set, I found myself at the edge of the city, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. I pulled over and got out of the car, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the chaos in my mind. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the horizon, trying to make sense of everything. I thought about Lily, about Evelyn, about Emma. I thought about the lies, the secrets, the pain. And then, slowly, a thought began to form in my mind. Maybe I didn't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe it was enough to take things one step at a time, to focus on what I could control. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, piece by piece. As I got back in the car and headed home, I felt a glimmer of hope, faint but undeniable. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you need. The days that followed were a blur of awkward silences and tentative attempts at normalcy. Lily and I tiptoed around each other, careful not to reopen wounds that were still raw and tender. Emma, sensing the tension, spent more time away from home, her absence a stark reminder of the family we once were. Evelyn, on the other hand, seemed to have retreated into herself. She spent most of her time in her room, the door closed, as if trying to distance herself from the chaos she'd helped create. I didn't know how to feel about her. Anger, pity, confusion. It all swirled together in a tangled mess. One evening, I found myself standing outside her door, my hand raised to knock but hesitating. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, or if I even wanted to say anything at all. But something inside me pushed me forward, and I knocked softly. "Come in," her voice called from within. I opened the door to find her sitting by the window, a book in her lap. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Peter," she said softly, "what can I do for you?" I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms over my chest. "I think it's time we talked." She nodded, setting the book aside. "I've been expecting this." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Why, Evelyn? Why did you keep this from me? Why did you let me believe a lie for so long?" She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I was scared, Peter. Scared of losing you. Scared of what you'd think of me. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd never forgive me." "And now?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Now I'm even more scared. I don't want to lose you, Peter. You're my son, and I love you." I felt a lump form in my throat, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "I don't know if I can do this, Evelyn. I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I understand. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am." We sat in silence for a while, the air heavy with unspoken words. "What about Lily?" I asked finally, my voice hard. "What's her role in all of this?" Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting away. She's been a part of my life for a long time. Longer than you know. But it's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, my anger flaring. "That seems to be the theme of my life lately." She flinched, her hands trembling. "I know I've hurt you, Peter, and I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. "I don't know if that's possible, Evelyn." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, but I'm not giving up on us, Peter. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I didn't respond, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could fix this. But the wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fresh. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I need time to figure out what I want." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Take all the time you need, Peter. I'll be here when you're ready." I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I'm going for a drive. I need to clear my head." She didn't try to stop me, just watched as I walked out the door, her eyes filled with sorrow. I drove aimlessly, the road stretching out before me like a metaphor for my life, endless, uncertain, and full of twists and turns. I didn't know where I was going or what I was looking for. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things were. As the sun began to set, I found myself at the edge of the city, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. I pulled over and got out of the car, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the chaos in my mind. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the horizon, trying to make sense of everything. I thought about Lily, about Evelyn, about Emma. I thought about the lies, the secrets, the pain. And then, slowly, a thought began to form in my mind. Maybe I didn't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe it was enough to take things one step at a time, to focus on what I could control. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, piece by piece. As I got back in the car and headed home, I felt a glimmer of hope, faint but undeniable. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need. When I got home, Lily was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Peter," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. "I don't know if I can do this, Lily. I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, but I'm not giving up on us, Peter. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I didn't respond, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could fix this. But the wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fresh. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I need time to figure out what I want." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Take all the time you need, Peter. I'll be here when you're ready." I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I'm going to bed. I need to clear my head." She didn't try to stop me, just watched as I walked out the door, her eyes filled with sorrow. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, piece by piece. And sometimes, that's all you need.